11 days after Wade Brenner emptied the joint accounts, signed the SUV over to himself, and walked their 2 kids into his lawyer's office on Broadway, Della Reimer sat on the floor of a friend's spare room in Winnipeg's West End and counted out $340 in loonies, fives, and 1 soft 20. It was every cent she had to her name. 14 months later, she was on the 6 o'clock news. Wade was watching from the living room of the house that used to be theirs. He was not ready for any of it. She had not set out to start a business. She started sewing again because it was the only thing her hands remembered how to do when the rest of her had gone quiet. Della grew up in Winkler, down in the southern part of Manitoba, where the land runs so flat you can watch a storm walk toward you for an hour before it arrives. She was raised mostly by her grandmother, Helena Reimer, who everyone in town just called Oma. Oma was born in 1938 and lived in the same narrow 2-story on Park Street for 61 years, and for most of those years she sewed. She sewed at a black treadle singer by the front window where the light was good. She made wedding quilts and baby quilts and the plain, heavy work quilts that the relief sale auctioned off every summer to send money places. Della couldn't find on a map. She hemmed every pair of trousers in 3 congregations. She turned collars on shirts so a man could wear them another 5 years. People came to the screen door with a torn coat and a worried face, and they left with the coat fixed and the worry a little smaller, and Oma never charged what the work was worth, and sometimes never charged at all. Oma kept a book. Not a Bible, though there was one of those too. This was a cloth-bound thing the size of a hymnal, the cover gone soft as suede from 40 years of hands. Inside were her patterns, drawn by hand and pencil, every quilt block she'd ever made, with little squares of the actual fabric pinned to the pages so you could see the color and feel the weight. And in the margins, notes. Press the seam toward the dark. Leave room for the thread to breathe. This one is the double wedding ring. It takes patience. Do not start it tired. Della was 4 the first time Oma stood her on a stool at the machine and let her run a straight seam, and she did not run it straight, and Oma did not fix it for her. She said, "You'll feel where it wandered. Find it. Make it hold." That was the thing Oma said most. Della heard it her whole childhood, heard it standing on the stool, and heard it again at 16 when she came home from school with her face wrecked over a boy. "Nothing's ruined just because it's torn," Oma said. "You sit with it, you find the seam, you make it hold." Della heard it the last morning she lived in that house, the morning she left for the city at 23 with a duffel bag and a job at a dry cleaner's on Portage. Oma put 2 things in her hands at the door, the pattern book and a small black and white photograph that had been tucked inside the front cover for as long as Della could remember. Oma at the treadle singer, 1976, 38 years old, a thimble on her finger and her chin tipped down at the work, half a smile on her like she knew exactly how the quilt was going to turn out and wasn't going to spoil it for you. Della carried both for 23 years. The pattern book sat on a shelf in every apartment and then in the house. She opened it less and less. After Oma got sick, she stopped opening it at all. Helena Reimer died on a gray Tuesday in November, 84 years old, 4 years before any of this, in the same upstairs bedroom she was born in. Della drove down for the funeral and sat alone in that front room afterward for a long time, looking at the treadle machine and the empty chair and the spool of thread still on the spindle, and she did not sew and she did not open the book. She drove back to Winnipeg the next day, put the book back on the shelf, and didn't touch it again for 4 years. She did not know yet that it was the only thing she owned that nobody could take. She would find that out, just not yet. Della met Wade Brenner when she was 28. He was 31, a financial advisor at a wealth management firm downtown, and what she noticed first was that he had a plan for everything. He kept a tidy life. He remembered things she'd mentioned weeks before. He talked about the future like it was a house he was already building, and she was tired of dating men who didn't seem to be building anything. They married when she was 30. She sewed her own dress and altered the bridesmaids for free, and Wade said it was more personal that way, and he was right. It was personal, and it was also the first small thing she did for his benefit that nobody ever saw her do. They had 2 kids. Isaac came when she was 35, Maeve when she was 38. Wade suggested she leave the dry cleaners when Isaac was born. The math made sense. Daycare cost more than she brought home, and Wade brought home plenty. So she stayed home and raised the kids and ran the house and did the books for the household out of a binder. A couple of years on, Wade suggested he take over the real finances. "You handle enough," he said. "Let me carry the money side. It's literally my job." That made sense too. A few years after that, he said the house should go in his name only. Something about the mortgage rate and a single borrower being cleaner. She signed where he pointed. She didn't read all of it. That is what you do when you trust the person handing you the pen. Wade was good at exactly one thing above everything else. He managed the picture. To their friends, he was the devoted husband. To his colleagues, he was the provider. To the kids, he was the dad who coached spring soccer and planned the trip to the lake. And every dinner party that built Wade's career, Della cooked it and sewed the slipcovers and pressed the linens. And Wade would say, "We put a little something together, never she made all this," and moved the talk along to the next thing. 12 years of it. Her hands were under every part of his life, and her name was on none of it. Not the mortgage, not the savings, not the line of credit, not the SUV, not the investment account. She didn't notice the ground moving because control done slowly doesn't feel like anything. You just wake up one ordinary day, standing on nothing. Wade started planning the divorce a long time before Della knew the marriage was in trouble. The way it came out later, in a courtroom, was that he'd been at it for 14 months. He hired a family lawyer named Lawrence Pell, a man who didn't deal in feelings, he dealt in structures. Over those months, one quiet transaction at a time, Wade moved everything. The house refinanced into his name alone, brought home on a Wednesday, with the line that it would save them money, and she only had to sign the back 2 pages. The joint savings, $41,000, swept into an account at a different branch under his name only. The statements stopped coming to the house, and she never noticed because she hadn't looked at a statement in years. The investment account locked into a holding with him as sole owner. The SUV title updated. The shared credit cards canceled. Wade told her there'd been fraud, and the bank was reissuing, and the new cards came in his name and she never saw them. 14 months, 7 documents, every one of them signed or processed, while she was helping Isaac with fractions or driving Maeve to swimming. The petition arrived on a Thursday. She was in the kitchen with a tea towel in her hand. Wade set the envelope on the counter between the salt and a bowl of clementines, and stood in the doorway and watched her read all of it standing up, every page, and when she finished, she set it back down exactly where he'd put it and didn't say a word, and neither did he. The temporary hearing took 6 weeks, and Pell moved fast because they'd been moving for over a year. The argument was almost insultingly simple. Della had no income, no account in her name, no employment in over a decade, no assets. On paper, she did not exist, and the court, looking only at paper, granted Wade temporary primary care of Isaac and Maeve, pending the final order. Temporary. The word didn't feel temporary. It felt like a door clicking shut from the other side. She packed one bag, clothes, the pattern book off the shelf, the photograph tucked in the front. There was one account Wade and Pell had missed, an old checking account from the first year of the marriage that nobody had ever closed. $340. The one thing they overlooked because it was too small to be worth the paperwork. Carmela Reyes pulled up out front at 10:15 in a rusted Corolla, didn't get out, didn't need to. Carmela was a personal support worker who'd done nights at Health Sciences Center for 16 years and lived in a walk-up off Sherbrooke, and she was the only friend Della had who'd answered the phone the first time. Della put the bag in the back, got in, and didn't look at the house. She looked at the book in her lap. Soft cover, penciled blocks, a photograph of a woman at a sewing machine who knew something nobody else did yet. He took the house, he took the truck, he took the kids. He took 12 years of her hands and erased them off every document that existed, and he left her with $340 and a book of quilt patterns, because those were the two things Lawrence Pell said weren't worth the trouble. He thought he'd left her with nothing. The first 3 days at Carmela's, Della barely left the spare room. She sat by the window watching the back lane, the recycling bins, people heading somewhere they were expected. Her phone had 2 messages from Isaac. "Mom, when are you coming home?" And then, "Maeve keeps asking." She read them both. She didn't answer because she couldn't tell her son she was coming home when she didn't know if it was true. And she couldn't tell him she was fine when she was sitting on a borrowed bed with $340 and no idea what the next thing was. She turned the phone face down on the blanket. The 4th night she couldn't sleep. Carmela was on shift. The flat ticked and settled. Della reached into the bag on the floor and pulled out the book she hadn't opened in 4 years, not since the funeral. The photograph slid out and landed on the duvet. Oma, 1976, thimble and half a smile. Della held it a long while. Then she turned to the first page. The note in the margin under the first block read, in pencil, in that careful hand, "This one is the easy one. Start here, you'll remember the rest." And it was like the old woman was sitting on the end of the bed, not loud, not dramatic, just there, the way she always had been. In the morning, before Carmela got home, Della borrowed her machine, a beat-up Kenmore that mostly worked, and she took apart a torn flannel shirt from the donation bag by the door and rebuilt the whole shoulder seam and turned the cuffs. And when Carmela came in off her night at 7:15, the kitchen table was covered in pins and the shirt looked 5 years younger. The 2 women looked at each other. "I need somewhere to sell this kind of work," Della said. "There's a market at the Forks on Sundays," Carmela said. "I know a woman with a fabric shop who might know more." Della laid the $340 out on the table and divided it. 60 for a vendor table and the cheapest sewing machine she could find used on Marketplace. 110 for fabric and thread and notions from the discount place on McPhillips. 20 for a folding table off a guy in Transcona. The rest a buffer that wouldn't buffer much. That first Sunday at the Forks, she set up between a man selling honey and a woman selling beeswax candles, with a hand-lettered sign that said mending and alterations, and a little rack of things she'd remade from the donation bins. A denim jacket with patched elbows, 2 pairs of jeans taken in, a child's quilt pieced from scraps. The other vendors had banners and square readers and business cards. Della had a folding table and a sign and her grandmother's eye. By 2 o'clock she'd taken in $41. A woman in her 60s had stopped, fingered the little quilt for a long time, and said it reminded her of one her own grandmother made, and bought it and asked if Della would be there next week. Della said yes. That was the only number that mattered. Week 2, she made 60. Week 3, 90. The mending built faster than the sewing because once people learned there was someone who could actually fix a thing instead of telling them to throw it out, they came back with arms full. But she was sewing in Carmela's flat, on a borrowed table, and she could feel that it wasn't a real footing. She needed a place. She found one through the woman with the fabric shop. Edith Wiebe was 71 and had run a little place on Selkirk Avenue for half her life, half thrift store, half fabric, bolts of cotton and a wall of buttons in baby food jars. Edith's late husband, Abram, had run an alterations and tailoring shop in the back for 30 years. And after he died of a stroke at 66, Edith couldn't bring herself to clear it out. The back room still held 2 industrial machines, a serger, and a long-arm quilting frame the size of a car, all of it under sheets, gathering dust, 11 years of it. Della had come in for thread 3 Sundays running, and on the 4th, Edith came out from behind the counter, sat her down on a stool, and said, "I've been watching you buy thread by the spool and quilting cotton by the half-meter because you can't afford a bolt. What are you doing, and who are you doing it for?" Della told her. Short and plain, no self-pity, the divorce and the $340, and the book and the markets and the borrowed machine. Edith listened to all of it. Then she pulled the sheet off the long arm in the back and said her Abram had hand-built half the modifications on it himself. And she would not give it away, but she'd rent Della the back room and the machines for $150 a month. And if Della made a go of it for 6 months, Edith would sell her the lot for what Abram paid in the 80s. "You'll have to fix it yourself," Edith said. "I'll get you the hands." The hands were Gordon Fair, a retired machinist from the railway who'd serviced industrial sewing machines as a hobby for 40 years and got the 2 old workhorses running again in 3 Saturdays for the cost of parts and a thermos of coffee. And Anika Tews, 26, a graphic designer between contracts, who set up a Facebook page and an Instagram and took photographs that made a turned coat collar look like something out of a magazine, in exchange for Della altering her entire wardrobe. Della painted the name on the front window herself with a stencil she cut from a cereal box and a tin of gold paint from the hardware store. Helena's. Her grandmother's name on a shop on Selkirk Avenue in the north end of Winnipeg. She taped the photograph of Oma to the wall above the long arm, where she could see it from the machine. The first month, the mending paid the rent and the machines stayed lit and not much else. But the work came in steady and then faster. A man brought in his late father's wool overcoat and asked could she make it fit his son, and she did, and he stood in the shop and cried a little and told 4 people. A woman brought a wedding dress to be cut down into a christening gown. The St. Norbert Market in summer, the Forks on Sundays, and the shop the rest of the week. Anika posted a daily before and after, a ruined thing on the left and a whole thing on the right, and the page went from 200 followers to 2,000 in a month. Every post the same quiet caption, "Nothing's ruined just because it's torn." Della wrote everything in a notebook each night, the way Oma tracked her recipes. Money in on the left, money out on the right, in pen, no shortcuts. By the 4th month, she was clearing $200 on a good day and had signed a lease, in her own name, $850 a month, on a 1-bedroom on Burroughs, where Isaac and Maeve could have the bedroom, and she'd take the pullout. She filed for shared care of the children 4 months after the divorce. Her lawyer was Devika Rao at Legal Aid Manitoba, 31, sharp and underslept, who had never gone up against a man like Lawrence Pell. Pell filed Wade's response in 9 days. It was 40 pages. The review hearing was at the Court of King's Bench on Kennedy Street in August, the Honorable Justice Madeleine Craik presiding. Pell went first. He put up screenshots of the Helena's Facebook page. Photographs of a folding table at a market. Self-reported income that, he noted, went up and down week to week. The fact that Della had spent her first 2 months on a friend's pullout before getting her own place. He framed every single piece of it as instability, a woman who couldn't hold steady income, running an informal little operation out of a borrowed back room. "This is not a stable environment," he said. He did not mention the commercial space lease, the registered sole proprietorship, the GST number, the tax filings Devika had stacked in a folder, because mentioning any of it would have made Della look like exactly what she was. A business owner. Devika went second. She was 22 years younger than Pell and didn't have his suits or his courtroom voice. She had a folder. Inside it, 4 months of clean self-employment filings with revenue climbing every month. The signed lease, Della's name on it. The shop lease with Edith Wiebe. The market vendor permits. 19 letters from customers, everyone handwritten. Everyone saying the same thing in different words. "This woman does honest work. This woman shows up. This woman fixed the only thing I had left of my mother." And a letter from Edith Wiebe, 71 years on Selkirk Avenue, stating that Della had never once missed rent and that the neighborhood trusted her. Justice Craik read all of it. She didn't rule. She continued the matter 60 days. She wanted to see income held steady and housing confirmed before she decided where 2 children should sleep. Same arrangement until then. Next case. Della walked out onto Kennedy Street into the August heat. 60 days. Hold 200 a day for 60 days without a gap. Keep the apartment. File 2 more clean months. Miss nothing. She looked at her phone. 1 message from Maeve. "Are you coming to get us, Mom?" She brought food and mending to every access visit, sat on Wade's front steps where she wasn't allowed inside her old house anymore, and watched her kids eat and held up whatever she'd remade for them, a jacket let out, a torn knee invisibly closed. One evening, Isaac said it quietly between bites. Dad asked why you're sewing other people's clothes on Selkirk. Della looked at him. What did you tell him? I said it was cool, Isaac said, and she understood with a cold drop in her stomach that Wade was asking questions. Where's the shop? How many customers? Who's helping her? It sounded like a father making conversation. It was not. He was keeping track. She didn't know how yet she would. The way he knew was Rhonda. Rhonda Sawatsky was Wade's younger sister, 41, who'd reached out to Della 2 months after the divorce, saying she didn't agree with what her brother had done. That family was family no matter what the papers said, and she'd come around. She came to the shop. She wiped down counters after market days. She brought industrial thread from the wholesaler because she had a membership card, and Della didn't. She asked how the hearing went and whether Della was okay and how the kids were. And Della answered honestly, because Rhonda had shown up when no one else from Wade's side had, and there was no reason on earth not to trust her. There was a reason. Rhonda owed $178,000 on a townhouse in Niverville, and Wade was the co-signer. 6 months before the divorce, in a phone call that lasted under 4 minutes, he'd reminded her of that. He didn't threaten. He didn't raise his voice. He told her he expected her to keep him informed about Della's situation, and that if she chose not to, he'd remove his name from the loan, and her credit wouldn't carry the mortgage alone, and she'd lose the house. Rhonda ran the numbers that same night. She knew exactly what would happen. So she called Della every week and asked careful questions, and texted her brother the answers. Every time, within minutes, for 5 months. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't enjoying it. She was in over her head, and she chose her own roof over her conscience. And whether that was the right arithmetic was a question only she could answer, and she hadn't answered it yet. In the 5th week of the 60 days, a woman in her 30s with a press lanyard stopped at the St. Norbert market table on a Saturday. She bought a remade child's quilt, then came back and asked how long Della had been doing this. Della D told her. Short, no drama. The woman said her name was Joelle Pruden, that she worked for the local station, and that she was putting together a series on women who'd built something with their hands. Can I feature you? She said. Della said she needed to think about it. She called Carmela that night and sat on the floor of the apartment with the book open on the counter across the room. A reporter wants to do a story on me. Carmela was quiet a moment. What would your Oma say? Della looked at the book a long time and didn't answer, and called Joelle back in the morning and said yes. Rhonda phoned that Wednesday and the call was ordinary. How's business? How are the kids? And then she asked something she'd never asked before. Heard a reporter came by the market. What's that about? Della told her. A local series, women in the trades, just the work, nothing about Wade or the divorce. Rhonda said that sounded wonderful, said she was proud of her. 14 minutes later, Rhonda was in a grocery store parking lot in Niverville texting her brother the reporter's name, the station, the topic, the timeline, every piece of it. Wade called Della on a Tuesday evening while she was closing the shop. He said her name soft, the way he used to when he wanted something to sound like her own idea. He said the divorce was private. He said going on television with their family's business would hurt the kids, that Isaac was getting questions at school, that Maeve had been withdrawn. He said she needed to think about what was best for them. She let him finish every word. I'm not telling our story, Wade, she said. I'm telling mine. And she hung up and turned off the lights. He called Pell within the hour, and Pell drafted a cease and desist to the station, stating that any segment referencing Wade Brenner or the divorce would be treated as defamation. He sent it certified and by email the same afternoon. That was Wade's mistake, the one that cost him everything he was trying to protect. Joelle read the letter, took it to her producer, and the producer sat back in his chair. The segment had been a 2-minute feel-good filler for the end of the 6 o'clock, the kind people forget by supper. but a man sending lawyers to kill a story about his ex-wife mending coats on Selkirk Avenue, the producer saw something else entirely. Not a sewing story, a power story. A woman who lost everything rebuilding in the open while the man who stripped her tried to shut her down from behind a lawyer's desk. The 2 minutes became 8. The filler slot became the lead. One camera visit became 3 days. Wade had taken a quilting story and turned it into a story about control, the exact thing he could not afford anyone to see. The crew came to the shop at 6 in the morning. Della was already there, the long arm threaded, the book open to the double wedding ring, Oma's photograph on the wall. Joelle told the cameraman to just shoot what he saw, and Della worked the way she worked, every day. Didn't perform, didn't look at the lens, ran the machine and pinned and pressed the way her grandmother had taught her on a stool 50 years before. They filmed the markets, the line of people that built at the table by mid-morning, the man getting his father's overcoat back. Joelle interviewed her on a stool between the long arm and the wall. Della said she'd started with $340 and a folding table and a book her grandmother gave her when she left Winkler. She didn't say Wade's name once. She didn't describe the divorce. "I lost everything I thought was mine," she said. "Then I found the one thing that was actually mine, and it had been sitting on a shelf the whole time." The camera moved to the book. Penciled blocks, pinned swatches, notes in the margin. Press the seam toward the dark. The photograph of Oma at the Treadle Singer. The segment aired on a Thursday at 6. 8 minutes. The title card read Helena's. One woman, $340, and her grandmother's book. Inside 48 hours, the Facebook page went from 2,000 followers to 26,000. The line at the market doubled. People shared it across the country with one sentence underneath: "You have to watch this." You already know who was watching. Wade was in the living room of the house on the south side when the segment started. The TV was on. He wasn't watching it. He was on his phone. Then he heard the name, Helena's, and looked up, and there was the shop, and there was Della at a machine wearing the same apron she'd worn in his kitchen for 12 years, tipping her chin at the work the exact same way. There was the book, soft brown cover, and he recognized it. It had sat on a shelf in his house for the whole marriage, and he had never once opened it, had no idea what was inside. There was a photograph of an old woman at a sewing machine, and he didn't know who she was. Had lived under the same roof as that photo for a decade and never asked. He heard a customer say, "She fixed the only thing I had left of my mother." He heard Della say she'd found the one thing that was actually hers, and it had been on a shelf the whole time. He saw the number on the screen. $340. That's what Pell had said was in the old account. "Not worth pursuing," Pell says. Wade had agreed. $340 was nothing. $340 was a shop with 26,000 followers and a line down the block. And a segment 250,000 people had now watched. He picked up the remote and turned the television off and sat in the dark house he'd taken from her, looking at a blank screen. He didn't see it then. He saw it now. It was too late. He picked up his phone and called Pell. "Can we use this against her in court?" he said. The final hearing was in October, same courtroom, same 2 tables, Justice Craik on the bench. Pell went first and built a new argument on the old one. The segment as Exhibit A. The 26,000 followers, the cease and desist his own office had sent, all of it framed as a woman who chose publicity over her children. He didn't mention that his own letter was the thing that turned 2 minutes into 8. Devika went second and laid out 5 months of rising income, the lease renewal. A court-appointed assessor's report that found the home clean and stable and the children eager to be there, and 23 letters from people who knew exactly what Della had built and how. Then she addressed the segment head-on. "Miss Pruden approached my client as a customer, not the other way around," she said. "My client never sought a camera. The only person who dragged a lawyer and a legal threat into this was the petitioner himself. She sold mending at a market. The attention came and found her. Justice Craik asked if either side had further witnesses. Pell said no. Devika said yes. The courtroom door opened and Rhonda Sawatsky walked in. Wade turned in his chair and looked at his sister. Rhonda did not look at him. She took the stand and stated, when Devika asked, that she was the petitioner's sister, that she'd been in contact with Della since 2 months after the divorce, and that yes, she had reported on Della's activities to her brother for roughly 5 months. She said Wade had asked her to. She said when Devika asked her why, that Wade was the cosigner on her mortgage and had told her that if she didn't cooperate, he'd pull his name off the loan. She said she couldn't carry it alone. Devika asked what had changed. Rhonda said, Wade pulled his name off the loan anyway, 6 weeks ago, because she hadn't passed along the news about this segment fast enough. She said the bank had started foreclosure. She'd lost the house in Niverville regardless. Devika entered 47 text messages between them, dated and timed, each one sent within minutes of a private conversation with Della. Justice Craik read them slowly. She looked at Wade, she looked at Pell. She closed the folder. The court finds that the father engaged in a sustained pattern of surveillance and interference through a third party, conduct fundamentally inconsistent with the best interests of these children, she said. Primary care and residence are transferred to the mother, effective immediately. She ordered an equal division of the family property under the Family Property Act, retroactive, the house and accounts to be valued and Della's half accounted for, and child supports set against Wade's income. She called the next case. Della walked out onto Kennedy Street, stood at the top of the steps, and called Isaac. "You're coming home," she said. The filing became public record the next week, and the part about the surveillance was written in plain enough language that anyone could understand it. 2 partners at Wade's firm read it. Trust was the whole product they sold, and here was a man who'd leaned on his own sister to spy during a custody fight. Nobody called him in to discuss it. They reassigned his book of clients quietly, and within a month 2 large accounts left on their own, not because anyone punished him, but because no one wanted to be the person who trusted Wade Brenner with their money. The woman he'd been seeing, Shauna Delisle, 31, in marketing, who'd never met Della, and had started with Wade 4 months before the papers were served, stopped returning his calls in November. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. She'd been there for the title and the reputation, and the title and the reputation were gone. Pell sent his final bill. $51,000. Wade had paid $51,000 to take everything from a woman who had $340. He lost the house to mortgage payments he could no longer cover and the equalization he now owed. The woman with $340 got her children back and her share of a marriage she'd built with her hands. There's a piece of this that the news segment never touched, and it's the part Della would tell you matters most. When Rhonda lost the townhouse, she had nowhere. The same week Wade moved into a 1-bedroom in Transcona, his sister was sleeping in her car in a Walmart lot in Niverville with 2 duffel bags and a cat. She showed up at the shop on Selkirk on a Tuesday, stood in the doorway, and couldn't get the apology out. Della looked at the woman who'd handed her every secret to the man who'd gutted her. She thought about Oma at the screen door, never turning anyone away. Nothing's ruined just because it's torn. She didn't say any of that out loud. She said, "You know how to run a serger." Rhonda said yes. Della said, "I open at 9. Rhonda Sawatsky worked the back room at Helena's for 2 years and never once was late. And the 2 of them did not talk about what came before, and somewhere in the running stitch of ordinary days the thing between them held. Wade called Della once, on a Sunday evening in December, from the apartment in Transcona. She was at the machine in the new place on Burroughs, with the kids doing homework at the table, and the photograph of Oma framed now on the wall above the stove. She saw his name come up. She turned the phone face down on the counter and let it ring until it stopped. He called Isaac the next day, and Isaac picked up. "I miss you, son," he said. Isaac was quiet a few seconds. "Mom's making pierogies tonight," he said. "I gotta go." He hung up. Not angry, not cold. Just somewhere else now, in a life that had moved on past the man who'd been so sure he controlled which way it went. The first night both kids slept on Burroughs, Della pulled the double wedding ring out of the back room, the one she'd finally finished on the long arm. The hardest block in the whole book, The one Oma's note said not to start tired. She'd quilted into the border, in thread the same color as the cloth, so you had to tilt it to the light to read it, the line her grandmother said most. Nothing's ruined just because it's torn. She laid it over both kids' beds in the room they shared. Maeve ran her hand over it and asked who made it. Della said, "Two of us. A woman who taught me everything, and me." Maeve looked up at the framed photo on the way to brush her teeth. "Who's that?" "The woman who taught me everything," Della said again, and that was the whole truth of it. Wade took the house, he took the truck, he took the kids. He took 12 years of Della's hands and tried to erase them off every document a lawyer could find. He left her with $340 and a book because those were the two things that weren't worth the paperwork. He thought he left her with nothing. He left her with everything, because the one thing he never understood, the thing he couldn't take because he was never able to see it, was where she came from. A narrow house on Park Street in Winkler. An old woman at a treadle machine who fixed what other people threw away and never asked what it was worth. A book of patterns with notes in the margins about pressing seams and leaving room for the thread to breathe. You can take what's written down. You cannot take what somebody learned with her hands at 4 years old, standing on a stool, told to find the place the seam wandered and make it hold. People who only ever count what a thing is worth on paper will always miss the thing that's actually worth something. And by the time they finally see it, it's already gone. If someone spent 14 months planning to take everything you had, then sat in the dark and watched you build it all back from $300 while they lost the lot, would you ever let them back in? Or would you let them sit with exactly what they built? This one's going to split the room. Tell me where you land. This story is fiction. The names, the places, the people, all of it invented. No one real is meant or named. But the things underneath it are not invented at all. Coercive control inside a marriage, the quiet restructuring of money during a divorce, custody fought on the back of who has assets on paper and who doesn't. Those happen in courtrooms across this country every single week. And the law that finally gave Della back her half exists for a reason. If you or someone you love is in it, talk to a family lawyer before you sign anything. And know that in Canada you can call 211 or the provincial family violence lines, and someone will help you find your footing. Some things can't be taken because they were never on paper to begin with. The seam that wandered can still be found. You sit with it and you make it hold.